Welcome to the IOB podcast, the Intro Outro Bed podcast. In our first episode today, we are going to talk about music, specifically intro music and your voice. And we're going to critique a podcast, not the content of the podcast, but the format. And the podcast is The Sip List, and it's a great one. You're listening to the IOB podcast. Our goal is to make you and your podcast the best. Thank you so much for listening to our first podcast, the IOB podcast. Yeah, it's the first one, so we're a little bit nervous, but we're really, really happy that you are here. So today, the focus is music and your voice. Regardless of the type of podcast that you're doing, you want to have music usually in your podcast in the intro, maybe as a bed, a transition, in the outro. Especially if you have it in the intro, you want it in the outro too. And when we say intro, obviously everybody knows it's the opening music, that opening theme. When we say bed, it's that music you can hear underneath your voice. Okay, so depending on the flow of your podcast, you might want a music bed. Transitions are obviously when we move from one section to another. And finally, the closing, when you finish your podcast. So music and your voice, is this match important? Is there such a thing as your voice and a certain song? Answer, absolutely. It is extremely important. And I'll just use some popular music examples. Can you imagine, for example, Celine Dion? Wow, beautiful singer, amazing singer. Can you imagine her singing an AC/DC song? I'm not sorry, Celine. That's really horrible. No, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's gonna really work. What about a singer like Jim Croce? I think I just aged myself. Singing something like Metallica. Not a really good combination. What about Steven Tyler from Aerosmith singing, for example, with a rap group like Run DMC? Oh, wait, that one did happen. Well, depending on your personality, you can project your voice into many different styles of music. But what's important is the style of music and the color of your voice. They need to match. They both convey a very important message. For example, if you're a soft-talking person, you're probably not going to want to do Run DMC. Maybe Jim Croce or Celine Dion. That might be better. If you have a podcast that is full of action, sports, or comedy, and you're just ready to go, in this case, AC/DC is perfect. Jim Croce, probably not. So this color of your voice, this natural ambiance of your voice is actually really important. And sometimes, we think I'm an AC/DC style, but in reality, we're not. And this can be a problem. Remember, there is no perfect voice, but we need to understand our voice. Speaking of voices, let's talk about some famous American radio DJs, disc jockeys from the old era up till now. There's a huge variety. If we go way back into the 1970s, we had a guy named Wolfman Jack. Oh, he was traditionally, regarding radio DJs, he was the ultimate in cool. Hello, everybody, I'm Wolfman Jack. Something like that. But on the other end, we have Wendy Williams, a female DJ, and she has been called a shock jock. Actually, they say a shock jockette. Howard Stern is a shock jock, and I guess she's a shock jockette. Anyway, Wendy Williams, a very different voice from Wolfman Jack, but equally as popular. I was listening to the radio the other night, and there's a guy named John B. Wells. Oh my God, he has the deepest, unbelievable, great voice. He's the type of guy, if you saw speaking at the supermarket, you would say, man, you need to be on the radio. Your voice is perfect for the radio. Yeah, he absolutely has it. Sometimes it's a little bit too deep. But once again, there's no perfect voice. It's his voice. It's his natural voice. Seriously. When I was a kid, I used to listen to a DJ named Casey Kasem. He did the American Top 40. And his voice was actually very nasally. Now, that's a horrible impersonation of Casey Kasem, but his voice came from the nose, which is not really, a DJ voice, but it was perfect for the radio. So his voice was perfect for his show. He did a fantastic job telling us what was popular all throughout the United States, and I know he was popular in Europe too. Let's go to another female voice, Laura Ingram. Laura Ingram has a very standard voice, nothing special. But what's interesting about her is she lacks upspeak. Do you know what I'm saying? And I want to say something, but do you know what I mean? And there's no vocal fry. So I don't know. And sometimes I don't care. But this is the idea of vocal fry. No upspeak, no vocal fry. Very standard, traditional, regular, typical, almost boring voice, but those are her characteristics and they work perfectly for her. Now, if you're doing a fashion podcast or some podcast on Hollywood, upspeak or vocal fry might be perfect for men and women. Let's go to Ryan Seacrest talking about Hollywood. Everybody knows Ryan Seacrest. I think he's actually doing the AT40 right now, right? And he also has a pretty standard neutral male voice, but when he speaks, we can hear a smile. And that is so important. Ryan, in my opinion, Ryan's voice is also, it's not as bad, so to speak, as Casey Kasem's voice, but it's not that, traditional man radio voice. It's not that deep. It's not as charismatic as that deep voice, but we can hear his smile and we can feel his energy. When he speaks on the radio, he's like my bro. He's my friend. I could be, having lunch with him, having a beer with him. A smile, you guys, goes a mile. It's so important. So there is no perfect voice, but you have your voice. So when you make an intro for a podcast, and not only the intro, also the bed, the transitions, the outro, you should have music in the background that accentuates your voice, that makes your voice more powerful, that makes it better. Let's go back to Ryan Seacrest. And imagine Ryan Seacrest has come to us because he wants to start a new podcast. And he wants an intro, nice background, and the words he's going to say are this. Hey, America, it's Ryan Seacrest here. Let's get the latest from the greatest today. So we need to take that and match it with some music. What do we have? I know that was a really terrible Ryan Seacrest impersonation. I don't think Ryan is listening, so I'm not going to worry too much. When Ryan speaks, he's going to sound very cheerful, very dynamic. He'll speak pretty quickly. So we need to create some sort of intro song that is going to match not only his intro, but his style and that speed and that voice color and that charisma. We want to make everything in his voice sound even more powerful, so it's got to fit the music perfectly. So we have a choice. We could, different genres of music, country music, pop music, classical, ballads. Obviously for Ryan Seacrest, which type of music? Heavy metal? Punk? Of course not. It's going to be pop music, popular music. That is what's going to work best for Ryan Seacrest. Now, because Ryan Seacrest is on the radio, he can actually use popular music. He can use Justin Bieber or Britney Spears or whoever he wants to use, right? He can use them because the radio stations pay the royalties to the music writers, the music creators, the singers. But for you and me, it is quite a bit different. As a podcaster, you, myself, we are responsible for the music that we put out. So if we want to use a pop song from somebody like Justin Bieber, we have to pay him money. And to be honest, it's probably not that much money, but to go through the legal loopholes, it is incredibly complicated. Now, if your podcast is popular, like Joe Rogan, somebody huge, well, then using a popular song can become very expensive. But for most of us, our listener base is quite small, so therefore it's actually not that expensive. But good luck on the legal loophole. Seriously, you're going to need it. If you want to distribute your podcast to the widest possible audience, you simply can't use Justin Bieber. It's a nightmare. It's a disaster. And every platform is going to require so much documentation, you will go crazy. So what do? It's easy. Create something like Justin Bieber. Pick, Justin Bieber's your guy. Pick a song. Baby, baby, baby. Oh, that's the only Justin Bieber song I know. And then go to somebody and make a song that is similar to it. It can't be the same, but similar if that's what you want. So Ryan Seacrest is definitely going to go down the popular music route. He's got to find something cheerful, something that has a good beat to it, something that matches his voice. And when he does, his intro is going to sound fantastique. It will, certainly will. Listening to your voice the first time, do you remember the first time you listened to your voice? It's very humbling. It's like, oh my God, I sound like that. Now, for some people, it's like, yeah, I sound really good. But for most of us, it's very humbling. Yeah. And you know what? It's more humbling when you zero in on a music style that actually goes with your voice. So in my case, I love AC/DC. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. However, I completely understand that my voice doesn't actually really sync with AC/DC. And the message that I have in this podcast and my other podcasts doesn't sync with AC/DC, so I can't use anything remotely similar to AC/DC. Maybe sometimes, but basically I can't. So you have to match your voice to the style of music, and that can be humbling. I thought I was AC/DC. You're not. It's not that easy. It's a process that actually you really need to consider. It's very important. For example, ladies, you might be thinking, oh, Jennifer Lopez is my style. But your voice actually says Joni Mitchell. Guys, you might be LL Cool J. Yeah, man, I'm on the block. Wait a minute, that's Jenny. But anyway, your voice might actually be saying Elton John. Yeah, there's a really huge difference from what is in your mind and what actually works. Yeah, that's not easy. What we project and matching it with music, finding that combination is not easy. And like I said, it can be very humbling. But don't work against it. Work with it. Your voice is your voice. And trust me, if you use your voice naturally and properly, without strain, just be yourself, there is music, there is a song, there is a beat, a melody that is going to accentuate your voice, and that is going to make you sound even better. It's going to add so much color to your podcast. In America, we have the we had the DJ, Don Imus. And I'm sorry, but Don Imus sounded like a Bugs Bunny character. He did. But he was one of the biggest radio DJs in the United States, and he knew his voice. Actually, probably his producers knew his voice. They heard his voice. They realized, boy, his voice is really bad, but people love to hear from him. So what they did is they matched songs with him when he was on the air. They went with it. Don Imus is important. Not necessarily the music, but that music can really build that foundation you might need in your podcast to attract, to keep, to enhance your podcast. So, check this out. If you can give us your podcast voice, hopefully it is your natural voice, and an artist, a singer, a song, or a genre of music that you think matches your voice, send me an email. I want to help you. And this is free, okay? We're ready to help. Me and TJ, actually, grammatically, TJ and I. So it's TJ and I, Mike and TJ. Did I introduce myself? By the way, my name is Mike. It's the first time doing this podcast, so I'm a little nervous. TJ is the music creator. I'm the blabbermouth here on the microphone, and we are ready to help you. We want to help you. We're pretty excited about helping you. So our first offer for everybody who listens to this podcast, send us your voice. Send us a song, a singer or a song title, an artist, a genre of music that you think fits you. Send it to us. Email us, okay? And we will be honest. We will say, yes, that's a great match for your voice, or no, that's really bad. It's not going to work. We'll be honest. And this is just our opinion, okay? And who are we? although we've been in the industry a long time. So take advantage of this offer. The email is contact@introoutrobed.com, and we'll be happy to check the match you think is perfect for your voice. Podcast critique, the SIP list. What a great name, the SIP list. Now, when I hear that, I'm thinking maybe coffee, maybe wine, something like that. Yes, it's about drinking. It's a great name, but it's not just drinking. It's also having a drink and discussing the top 5 from things like movies and music and books and pop culture. Really, really great stuff. The SIP List podcast got back to us and said, you know what? Go ahead. Let's see how we're doing. Give us a critique. And we are honored to give you a critique. You are our first critique. So we're going to try to be really nice, and we'll see how this goes. So I listened to several of your episodes, and I have to say, number one, very good audio quality. The quality of your voice, the microphone quality, very, very good. And for most of your guests, the voice is also very good, as you probably know. However, there is some copyright problems with some of your music. Now, you had the Mother's Day podcast, and the song that you chose was perfect for Mother's Day. But it's a copyrighted song, and that's going to be a huge dilemma. So we got to fix that in the future, that's for sure. Your editing over the music, by the way, your voiceovers, very, very good. I'm impressed. You are not new to the podcasting scene. If you are, great, great job. Just remember, and to you and also to your guests, keep your face in front of the microphone. Right now, I'm talking directly into the microphone, but if I go off just a little bit, you're going to hear a pretty big audio difference. And in a podcast, that's important. You don't want that. You want to maintain that steady level, that steady volume. So specifically, you had a guest named Jen, and Jen's audio sometimes cuts out. Be careful. This is exactly where you literally want your face, your mouth in front of the microphone. One thing I want to tell you about the flow of the show, when you start out, please tell us what's coming up, okay? Now, specifically, get into specifics. It doesn't have to be too long or, super detailed. Actually, the shorter, the better. But when somebody new tunes into your podcast, and even your regular listeners, although we know it's another SIP-isode, we still want to know, or even be reminded, I know it's in the title, but we want to know why we are listening. So obviously we're here to have a nice drink, but which list? What about are we going to be talking about? We need to know that. It's very important to remind the listener right in the beginning to let them know what is coming up. So the content of your podcast is great. The usage of the word SIP-isode is really cool. And this is something, I'm sure you've thought about it, but this is something that you can probably capitalize on. The content, the name, it's got great potential, great monetary potential. This could be a huge podcast, so get serious about it, okay? About the music, about your style, about the format, and especially about CTA. CTA. A lot of new podcasters forget about CTA, or they think it sounds, too intrusive, or you're asking too much. CTA means call to action, which means you want your listener not only to listen, but to do something. Make sure people know how to contact you. Do you have an email list? Get them to sign up for the email list. Maybe you have some sort of sponsorship with a wine company or a drink company, or maybe it's a local bar or something. Well, let us know how we can contact those people so you can get paid too. The listener, are we just listening? For some podcasts, that's fine, but actually the bigger you get, you want more than just listening. You want to interact with your listener. So give them an email address, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, a website. Now, email is key. It's the number one CTA that any podcaster out there should be striving for. Build an email list. And we'll talk about email lists and their importance in the future. I did notice that you have an advertisement in the very front of your podcast. That's kind of a turnoff, especially to new listeners, especially if your podcast is still small. you don't have a huge listener base, so word of mouth wasn't a big reason people come to you. Advertisements, well, on YouTube, we just kind of skip over them. We try to skip over them, and that's not good. Sometimes we just turn off the video on YouTube, or in this case, a podcast. So kind of watch that stuff. You're in a pretty competitive genre. There's a lot of alcohol-related podcasts out there. There's a lot of top 5 lists of this, that, and the other thing out there. And I don't really want to listen through an advertisement. If you're going to do an advertisement, make it more personal. Make it more perhaps directly related to the listener or to you and your life. Now, sometimes there's a requirement for your podcast to have an advertisement, but still, try not to have it in the very beginning. Wait a couple of minutes before you drop the ad. Better in the middle and fine at the end. And something you might be able to do in the beginning, say, by the way, this podcast is brought to you by blah, 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 and I'll talk about them later. And then get into your story, okay? Your outro tag was great. I really liked the comment. It was fantastic. One thing I do want to recommend also is when you're talking with your guests, you have great rapport with your guests, great conversation. But remember, it's not just you and your guest talking. You should be interacting with the listener too. So that's something you got to think about and work on. But you're doing great. The whole format of the show is very nice. The editing and audio quality, very nice. Be careful of the copyright. That is going to get you into trouble eventually. And by the way, everybody, there's a lot of free music out there too, right? I'm sure you've gone to the sites and listened to the stuff. You can still get flagged on that stuff too, believe it or not. Not necessarily kicked off a platform, but you might lose advertising power. And actually, the music creator will get that advertising power. So if that doesn't bother you, that's fine. But just always, always, always be careful with your music, your intros and outros and all of that stuff. It's tough. And when you go to bigger platforms where you can get a bigger audience, again, music is crucial. You want to have it in your podcast, but you do not want a copyright flag. They might shut your podcast down and you would lose your content, and that's really no fun. So skip that. Don't use copyrighted music. Siplist, you did a great job, and our offer stands. If you would like TJ to make you an intro song to your liking, just give us a call. Well, actually, don't call us. You have to email us, and the email address is contact@introoutrobed.com. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of the IOB podcast, the Intro Outro Bed podcast. We need to hear from you. Please send us an email, contact@introoutrobed.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram, Intro Outro Bed. Pretty easy. And if you want to find us on YouTube, just Google Intro Outro Bed, all one word. And of course, our website, IntroOutroBed.com. Super, super easy. Please rate us on iTunes and wherever else you get this podcast. And remember, we are here to make you the best.